It's good to see you. I know you're busy historically in Black History Month there in the UK. As you know, here in the US we have those in February. But I think you and I, Black History Month is every month.
Amen. Amen.
Yes. Amen or Amun.
Amun.
Yes. And speaking of Amun, I want us to deal, substantially with African spirituality today, because I think it's the basis of everything. And if we can get to an understanding of African spirituality, we can get to an understanding of African culture. And African culture has a diversity, but it's a diversity that's a historical fact that has occurred over time, depending on circumstances, and of course, history itself, meaning time. And the reason why I say this, and this is going to be a long introductory statement in a sense, because I just got back from Surinam. And as you know, Robin, and maybe you can touch on this, you may know even more than I do about Surinam. But Surinam was one of those countries. Of course, it was colonized by the Dutch and taken over by the Dutch, and the Dutch brought enslaved people, from West or Central Africa into that area of South America. It's on the north coast of South America, sort of next to Guyana, and Brazil is also a next door neighbor. But what is interesting about Surinam is the maybe it's a pejorative term at this point, so-called bush Negroes, but Maroons who escaped from slavery and went into what's basically the Amazon jungle and lived there and developed their own civilization, shall we say, in the villages, very much like the Quilombos in Brazil. So they've done that over time. And we went there at the invitation of the vice president, who is a Maroon. And this is historic because he's obviously part of the government at a very, very high level. And part of the delegation was a number of kings and queens from Africa. So it was a cultural entity. And it was good to see the similarities, if you will, because we went out into the villages as well as being in the main town, Paramaribo. So it was enlightening. But again, the royals are from different cultural backgrounds in Africa. We had those from Ghana, we had those from Nigeria, we had those from Kenya, we had those from South Africa, and we had one from Niger, who essentially was very much a sultan and very much in the ancient Islamic type of thing, like the Sardano of Sokoto type of person. So there was that mix. So there was obviously a superficial difference in terms of cultures, but there's a deeper consistency. And I think that is what is important, because I think that deeper consistency comes out of the spirituality that is basic to Africans. And as you and I know, and maybe you can pick up on this and elaborate on this, is that the spiritual aspect of our culture has been carried over and manifested, certainly in terms of Vodou, if you will, or Vodun, whatever the correct term is, certainly in Haiti and in other parts. And then, of course, as we know, in Brazil, especially in Bahia, the Yoruba culture is very strong. In Jamaica, we have our Maroons, and the identification may be very much more with Ghana, but it's also a mix. So, this is ultimately what unites us is our spirituality. But it manifests in a diversity of different ways. And I think, for example, even the Rastafarians looking to Ethiopia, but it's very much a spiritual thing in terms of Jah which is the Rastafarian name for God, and that, of course, is simply a name for the Supreme Creator as a spiritual entity. So wherever we have gone, we have maintained our spirituality, even though, again, there is some cultural diversity on top of it. I think if you go all the way back, whether it's to Kemet, Ethiopia, Kush, Nubia, and so on, I think you find that the human being, and going back beyond time in that sense to Homo sapiens sapiens, the human being is searching for a relationship between divinity, if you will, and nature, and our own humanity. And obviously, when we say nature, we include not just plants per se, but animals, the rocks, the water, the earth, the air, and of course other human beings. And if you look at it, there is that primordial understanding that there's a supreme being, and the supreme being gave birth to us in terms of our creativity, and in terms of that creativity, we are all manifestations of that supreme being, and it goes back to nature and neteru, with all the different functionalities of that supreme being manifested in nature. So if you look at all African religions, I think you'll find right from the start that they're nature religions. By that meaning that they see divinity in everything around them. So there's nothing that is not sacred. The individual is sacred, the plants are sacred, the ground is sacred, and so we're born environmentalists. And we would not, in our civilization, create the climate disaster that is being created at the present time, because nature is part of that trinity, if you will, meaning divinity, nature, and us. And it brings to mind a favorite quotation, of my dad: God and nature first made us what we are, and then out of our own creative genius, we make ourselves what we want to be. Follow always that great law, and let the sky be our limit, and eternity our measurement. And again, that's a whole cosmological understanding, I think, of African spirituality, and how Africans see meaning in life, in that there's an order to everything, and it's a divine order, meaning that there's an interconnectivity, therefore, of divinity, nature, and humanity. There's a link there, and there's a unity, and that, in the original sense, it's ma'at, which is the order and harmony and balance within the universe. And then certainly later on in the Bantu philosophy, if you will, it is Ubuntu, because you're I am, and because I am we are. So there's that unity in terms of everything, and then that manifests itself in society on a day-to-day basis. So I think African spirituality is key to an understanding of the African person, to an understanding of African cultures. And then, we get all the way back down to reparations, because what has happened, as you know, and we've talked about, before, is that there have been incursions of Islam on the east, the north, and the east, Christianity on the west and on the south. And between both religions, we have been disconnected from our original understanding of who we are as human beings, how we relate to nature, and how we relate to each other. And in order to,
jump in?
yeah, please jump in now. Yeah, but anytime.
Yeah, what you've said there is very, very profound. So let me put a shape to it.
Beautiful.
Professor Maulana Karenga, in a book called Introduction to Black Studies,
Yes.
he identified the common features that run across traditional African religions. And then other scholars have added to it and added to it. You mentioned the connection between the individual or the human, divinity and nature. There's even a book by a Nigerian philosopher in this country called Chukwuniri Kamalu called Person, Divinity and Nature. And some of the similarities that Karenga has spotted, he spotted. So let me put together the most important ones. The first feature is that every location of Africa had its own understanding of the divine force or forces. And that local understanding meant that no one would ever be forced to convert from one tradition to another. And there was mutual respect between the different traditions. So if you lived in the area that we would today call Nigeria, if you lived in the Igbo territories, the largest shrine was Chukwu. And if you were in the Yoruba territories, the most important deity would be Olodumare. And there'll be no conversion from Chukwu to Olodumare or vice versa, because the mutual respect would already be built in. The second feature is you would have this idea that a human being could become a part of the Godhead if their deeds in life were great enough and the society chose to deify that human being. So if we take, for example, Shango, who is now a Yoruba deity, was originally a Yoruba king who was associated with great contributions to metallurgy, and the result is the Yoruba community have deified him. A third feature would be the deity being near and far. Immanent, meaning inside you, inside things, inside animals, inside the rocks, and transcendent out there in the heavens somewhere. And then the idea of intermediaries existing between the near and the far. And those intermediaries will be the Orishas, if you're in the Yoruba tradition, sake of argument, or the Numo in the Dogon tradition. Then we have another set of intermediaries, which will be the ancestors, and the ancestors being revered because of their contributions to the life of the community, their role as guardians of tradition and life. And they were seen as the ideal intermediaries, and you would communicate with them through the pouring of water in some traditions, the pouring of spirits in another tradition. People call this communication libations. Then we have the idea of religion or spirituality or tradition acting as a social glue, gluing the community together. And that meant, as you rightly say, sir, that in traditional African societies, there was no division between the secular and the divine. It was all divine. And consequently, our kings were not politicians, they were closer to being priests. And their religious function. So if we're dealing with the pharaohs of Kemet, they were very, very much the guardians of Ma'at. In other words, that was their job. Their job was a religious job, not necessarily a political one, although the two have now overlapped. According to the Reverend Canon John Mbiti, it's almost like I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. Another feature, as you rightly say, sir, is the reverence for nature, where you have sacred trees, sacred rivers, sacred mountains, and sacred animals. So if you're dealing with, say, the Igbo tradition, Idemili is the Ogilisi tree. I visited the East African coast, and I visited some of the East African cities, and they would have a mosque for your Muslims, and then they would have the baobab tree for your traditionalists. And the baobab tree becomes the place of reverence and serenity. Then we have the idea of death being a stage in the life cycle. And as long as the living continue to speak your name and venerate your name, you are still a part of the living. And then, of course, you've got the final thing, which is the split between the esoteric and the exoteric, where the esoteric is where you've got the deep aspects of the religion or spirituality, including astronomy, including readings, including the hard sciences, including numerology and so on. And then you've got the exoteric, which is the instruction for the masses. And so these 8 features run through. And as you rightly say, sir, with people being captured and enslaved and being dragged across the Atlantic Ocean, the Yoruba tradition has more or less survived intact. Certainly in places like Cuba, that is the state religion. It's not Catholicism as most people think. It's actually the Yoruba tradition. The Cuban version of it's called Santeria. In places like Brazil, it's a big part of Black Brazilian culture, and for that matter, non-Black Brazilian culture, because a lot of them are into it as well. And then we have in Trinidad, it's a big part of African culture in Trinidad. So we can see examples where the traditional African religion, the traditional African spirituality has more or less survived intact. And that's been the most impressive example. Now, in Jamaica, you've got bits of the Kumina tradition. Some people in Jamaica, they call it Pocomania, which I gather is from Congo. And obviously, there's the Ghanaian Ashanti-ish tradition that the Maroons brought over. And our culture is a mixture of all of that.
Greetings, my name is Robin Walker. I'm also known as the Black History Man. I am perhaps best known for my 2006 book, When We Ruled. Based on this book, I'm launching a new online history course aimed at you, the adults. You could be a parent, you could be a teacher, a mechanic, cleaner, professionals, care workers, security guards, taxi drivers, kitchen workers, entrepreneurs, tech heads, lawyers, all of you. We want people from all over the world to be empowered by our content. We want you to gain mastery over your history and heritage. And you can do this by subscribing to our course. Click on the link to get this powerful, life-changing material.
And the thing is that the essence of it is not recognized, shall we say, anymore in a conscious manner, because what we have just talked about informed day-to-day life. As we say, everything was sacred. Your work was sacred. Your work was really a ritual. It wasn't so much a work, because what you were doing, you were sharing with the community. It wasn't just for yourself. It was always a communal exercise in terms of what you're doing, because we're all part of one thing. So there's the family, there's the extended family, which is then there's the community, and then there's the nation. But it all spreads out and has a unifying essence to it. So there was no estrangement one from another. There were no strangers, so to speak, because we're all grounded in the same spirituality, and we have that conscious understanding of spirit, as you mentioned, in us as well as outside us and surrounding us. No, that's beautiful, and that gives you such peace and contentment and ability to function to your maximum, and not be competitive per se, but simply maximizing your potential, in terms of your gifts from the divinity, if you will, as opposed, to a system. And maybe I don't want to get to the opposed system just yet, but that was the glue that held us together. Now, definitely at a superficial level, of course, you would have conflict in terms of one group in one area encroaching on another group in another area. Let's say, the Fulani, who may have been, cattle herders or what have you, and not sedentary agriculture is moving from one area into the other area. So you have these kind of, societal or political conflicts, if you will, which can lead to war and obviously emphasize the divisions in terms of the culture of the different people.
Can I jump in there, sir?
Please do, yeah.
But what's interesting about the conflict is they're not religious conflicts. They're not spiritual conflicts.
Mhm.
They're not A conquers B, therefore A converts B to their religion and tells B that their religion is nonsense. It's not that. Do you see? And that's a very, very important thing, you see. Our religions were spread not by conquest. They were spread by culture. They were spread by, I mean, if you look at, for example, the most extraordinary situation of the 20th century, the rise and spread of Rastafari. If you compare that to, say, the rise and spread of any of the so-called monotheistic religions, as Professor John Henrik Clarke said, a lot of them have got murder cult histories. Rastafari is in Japan, and it wasn't spread by any kind of violence. It was spread by people liking the livity and deciding to get with the livity. Absolutely no force, absolutely no compulsion. And I think that is a superior historical record of how you spread a spirituality compared to doing it at the sword or at the point of the gun.
I think there's a concept there as well. Is that if we are made in the image of God and we manifest that image, I don't manifest it any differently from you manifest it. If you understand, yourself in terms of your relationship to God and your perception of God. So how can I convert you when you're already a manifestation of God in terms of my spirituality or my religion? It's simply a matter of different superficial characteristics of how we manifest that same God, which is in each of us. So there's no conversion. We're born, as spiritual beings having a physical experience, and all you have to do is understand your spirituality to maximize, your experience. And as you mentioned, conversion is ridiculous. Someone who's born in the image of God, how can you convert them to God? I mean, they're already God, and it's important. And a point I think that is important in terms of African spirituality, and if you will, religion, we really do have an understanding that we are made in the image of God, and God created us to manifest that image. Where I think you find that the Abrahamic or even Christian religions per se create God in their image, so that God is very much a mental construct, and is being refined. I mean, it's the ultimate anthropomorphism, if you will, to create in your own image. And I think that's really a specific difference between African religion and other religions, shall we say. And that includes, I would say most of them, certainly in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
As a thank you for visiting our website, we are giving you a free copy of our exclusive 100 Black History Facts, which is in fact a taster of our course content. Make sure you leave your email address and we will send it right to you. We hope it inspires you to dig deeper into your history and heritage.
And you're right. What then happens is once they create God in their own image, it then becomes a tool of European supremacy, and it then results in all kinds of nonsense. If I can mention only in passing, because I know it's a hot topic, but what's going on right now in the Middle East, in the Levant area, you've got people fighting over land and people claiming that it's theirs because chosen people this and chosen people that. And a lot of these ideas come from a kind of arrogance that comes when people can create God in their own image and then use that to deify their image and then use it as a weapon against other groups of people?
I think what you just said is mind-boggling. And they then deify their own image, and that's exactly what white supremacy is: a deification of white people, and that's that blowback, shall we say, from their creation of God in their image, and therefore they see themselves as gods. You know, I think that's fabulous in terms of an explanation.